Hello my friends, I'm Duchess and welcome to my YouTube channel. I just watched spyxfamily this past week, so I decided to draw the main characters. Let's get started. I have been seeing a lot of fan art for spyxfamily, so it made me wonder if the show was really that good. My little sister is also obsessed with it, so I thought I would see how I like it. I would definitely recommend this anime to anyone who likes comedy, some action, and wholesomeness. I looked up a picture of the Forger family on Google Chrome and found this nice picture of the three of them. I wanted to show you guys a more detailed drawing process video, so I recorded the whole thing using screen recording on my iPad. This way of recording might be better than my usual way. Let me know what you guys think of it in the comments below. So I decided to start from the right to the left, starting with Yor. This is my first time drawing them, so I was really anxious but also very excited. I was thinking beforehand that Yor and Lloyd wouldn't be too hard to draw, but Anya would be very difficult. I don't usually draw children, so Anya was definitely a challenge, especially because her eyes make up like half of her face, and I don't usually draw very big eyes, so it was going to be definitely difficult for me. I tried not to think about it too much as I was drawing. The outlines for the Forgers were pretty easy because only half of their bodies were shown in my reference picture. The sketch would be a lot more detailed and took me maybe an hour or so. The outline is one layer, the next layer is going to be labeled sketch, and that's where I'm going to draw the details of the characters in blue. I honestly didn't expect the sketching part to take so long, but because it was my first time drawing them, I had to take a lot of time to look at the reference and just make sure that I was drawing the clothes and the hair correctly. I don't draw roses like ever because I learned from an early age that I suck at drawing roses. I could never really get it to look like a rose, even if I had a real reference or a picture to copy it from. However, I did pretty well with the rose sketch of Yor's headpiece. Hopefully the inking of that goes well too. Anya Forger was next. Sketching her wasn't too bad. It was easier than I thought it would be, but her dress had a few tiny details which ended up taking me quite some time to draw. Lloyd Forger was next, and he was surprisingly the easiest to draw. I actually really suck at drawing men, but I have been practicing lately and I have been drawing less women so I could focus on drawing guys. I didn't expect it to be as easy as it was, so that was really nice. Now that I am done with the sketch, I'm going to make another layer and label it ink. This is going to be my final layer for the drawing part. After this, I'm going to start coloring. Story time. I drew Yor first, then Anya, and then I'm going to draw Lloyd. I always go from the right to the left because I'm a lefty. A lefty would probably understand my struggles. Growing up, we're all taught to read and write from left to right, of course, but whenever I wrote or I drew, my left hand would always end up smearing all of my drawings and my writing, and it was just very messy and ugly. After writing or drawing, the side of my left hand would also be black because of the lead, so yeah, it was very messy. So eventually I learned to draw starting from the right to the left, and I do this even digitally, even though you can't really smear anything. Alright, story time over. So inking is pretty easy, especially digitally. I always had trouble inking my drawings traditionally, but with digital art you can always go back and erase it or fix it. Traditional art is usually always permanent. Let me just zoom through the inking part. Coloring time. I used to use at least like 30 layers when I drew in Procreate, but I've managed to decrease the amount of layers that I use by coloring most of the drawing in one layer. I used to color every little thing on a separate layer, so nothing was ever really on the same layer, if that makes sense. I just tried this out last week and it has been working for me, so I'm just going to keep doing it this way. First, I created a coloring layer and I changed the background of the drawing to a different color. The background is the bottom layer and it's there automatically. The reason that I do this is so that I can see everything that I color and everything that I don't. While it makes it very hard to see things clearly, the Forger family members have pretty light skin tones, so if I were to color in their skin, I might not be able to differentiate between the white and their skin tones. So I might have some uncolored areas where their skin should have been colored. After the skin, I color in their clothes. I did this all on the same layer. I have a trick for the shading later that I'll teach you guys when I get to the shading part. I also color the whites of their eyes on the same layer. For the hair, I create another layer. This is because I have a lot of shading and effects that I do specifically for the hair, so I don't want it to mess with the other colors of the drawing. For the iris and the eyebrows, I also put that on a separate layer because I already colored the whites of the eyes on the first coloring layer. So if I put the iris on top of it, it would make the shading unnecessarily difficult for me because I would have to be mindful of the white part and then the iris. Time for shading. As you can see, I have 3 coloring layers only. I'm going to shade this by adding another layer on top of the first layer. I click on the layer and it has these options that show up on the side. You have rename, which I use all the time, reference, alpha lock, etc. I use the clipping mask option. Then I click on the end of the newly created layer. This gives me a lot of options. You can see add, color dodge, lighten and darken, etc. These are just like effects for a particular layer. Automatically, when you create a new layer, it'll be set to normal, but for shading, I always use multiply, which makes the colors that I use on this layer darker than it usually is. So what this does is it lets you color on the layer, but it only shows up on the drawing or colors that you use on the layer that it's clipped to. I'm using clipping mask for this layer, which is above my first coloring layer. So anything that I do on this clipping layer will only show up if it's directly on top of the bottom layer that it's clipped to. Sorry if that doesn't make sense. You might understand the more that you watch. I create multiple multiply layers because I shade different things in these different layers. For example, I'll shade their skin in one multiply layer, then all the clothes in another, so that I save space but also don't end up smearing everything together when I blend. I discovered recently that it's a lot easier to shade if you use the selection tool in Procreate. At the top left, I click on that and select what I want to shade, particularly on this clipping mask layer. I selected some areas on her face which are covered slightly by her bangs, so you know this is where shadows would be. You can see this dotted line that I created, which just shows the area I selected. Now I use a brush, choose a shading color, and color in the selected area. You can see that what I color only shows up in the selected area, which is the beauty of the selection tool. Also, going back to the clipping mask explanation, I did not draw or color anything in this clipping mask layer so far. It's literally completely empty besides the selection area I just did. I clipped it to the first coloring layer so that when I draw on the clipping mask layer, it'll show up on top of the coloring layer. Now I'm going to speed through the shading process because it took me like 3 hours. I also make another clipping mask layer and set this one to the add effect. Add makes things brighter, so I use this effect to make things glow, look shiny, or to just add some light in my drawing. I also add a normal layer by just adding a layer. This one is a top clipping mask layer for my first coloring layer because this is where I will add highlights, lipsticks, blush, etc. I don't want any special effects for this one, just a normal regular layer. Now I'm done with the shading, I'm going to go back and blend in all of my shading work. This part is pretty easy and will be a lot quicker than the other parts of the process. Now that I am done with that, I'm going to do the makeup on that normal layer that I was talking about earlier. I clipped it to the first coloring layer, which has the skin tone on it. So this is the finishing product of my 6 hours of hard work. It took me a lot longer than I thought it would, but I'm actually really proud of how this drawing turned out. I'm definitely going to be drawing more fan art for spyxfamily. Follow me on Instagram at Duchess_art1 for more fan arts and other content. That's all I have for you guys this week. I hope you guys enjoyed this week's video. If you found it entertaining or if you learned something new, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get notifications. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next week.